Hi, Dave Smith here, DJS Photography. This is part 2 in my black and white conversion post-processing technique. We've got our image right up here in front of us. We saw this image in part 1, we made our selections, our hard selections over here in the channels palette, and we're going to go ahead and do the conversion now, or certainly the first stage of the conversion. So let's get into Photoshop, hit Filter, Collection, Silver Efex Pro2. Now it's going to load this into the Silver Efex plugin. It'll just take a moment, so we'll just let it do its job. See how we get on. Now this is quite quick. Remember, this poor little MacBook Pro is doing all this processing for the image at the same time as it's recording the screen, so I've turned everything that I can off, although I see I've still got Firefox running, but most things are off, and we're just going to leave it to do its thing. And there it is. So not too bad, and you can see we get a whole range of presets here. We get this neutral result, underexposed, overexposed, and many people would take these three. They would process this image 3 times through Silver Efex and get these 3 images and load them in as layers in Photoshop and then blend the layers together. And that's a perfectly reasonable way of doing it, and sometimes I do, but it's not my normal routine. If we just scroll down, we can see there's a whole load of presets here we can apply to our image, and many of these give a perfectly good rendition. It's not really how I'm going to do it. We'll just have a look at 1 or 2. Okay, and you can see that's got quite nice separation in here, in this bottom area, although I don't like the tones of this middle set of hills here. A little bit better there, eh? So we could probably well pick out aspects of the presets, but that's not what we're going to do. We're going to go over here and use the global adjustments initially. Now this opens up like this because that's how I last used it, but ordinarily when you use Silver Efex for the first time, this is how the global adjustments panel will open up to you. And many people, I'm just going to zero that back out. Let's get rid of that. Oh, there we go. Let's get that to 0. Okay, now what I would normally do is open these 3 sliders up so I can deal with the highlights, mids and shadows as I want. Okay, so I'm just going to test the brightness a little bit first. I'm just going to try with dynamic brightness and see how we get. That's quite nice, isn't it? Just take the global brightness down a little. Now remember, I won't take that down too much, because although I want this top area to go dark, I don't necessarily want it to go completely black. So I'm just going to bring this dynamic brightness back up a little touch, and I'm going to take the midtones down. Okay, yeah. Now I'm going to take the highlights up somewhat, because remember, I want these clouds in here to jump out at us from this dark grey sky. I'm just going to take the shadows and just take those up a touch. Okay, that's looking quite good so far. The contrast I'm going to take up, okay, because again I want these white clouds to. I'm on a. Okay, sorry. Let's go back through that. Sorry, I'd left that on one of the presets down here, and that's why I was getting some adjustments showing in here. These, if you're on this neutral preset, these should all be set to 0. I didn't quite focus on that. Okay, so we're into it now. So let's take the brightness down. Yeah, that's more like what I was expecting to see. And let's take the dynamic. That's quite good. We're going to take the midtones down, just to quite a long way. There we go. Okay, maybe too far. Let's just take that back a little touch, because we're going to do something else with this sky before we leave Silver Efex. I'm going to take the highlights up. I'm going to leave the shadows, I think. I'm going to contrast. I'm going to boost the overall contrast. Not too much, because I'm going to amplify the whites. Not too much. Okay, and I'm going to just give the blacks a touch, and I'm going to bring that soft contrast. Oh, that looks quite nice there, actually. Okay, and then the structure. We'll bring the structure up. Do you see how those clouds popped in here just then? Let's bring the highlights up, and the mid-tones. We'll go down a little just to keep those nice and smooth, and shadows will leave. The fine structure we will boost. Okay, and the last thing I'm going to do in this palette, just going to bring up the shadows slightly, not too much, and what I'm just doing there is protecting the tonality of the shadows. That's this area right in here, so that we don't get that going to pure black. And we'll do something with curves a bit later to protect that. Then the last thing I'm going to do before we go here, I don't usually use selective adjustments in Silver Efex. We're going to do that with our masks, okay? But I do go into these colour filters. Let me turn my zoom on. These filters here are just as if you'd put coloured filters on your old film camera shooting in black and white. But we've got more control here. So if I put a red filter on, oh, it's way too much. Yellow would be the standard landscape filter, and look, that's done quite nicely down here. So we'll remember that when we come back to there. But it's not doing much for the sky. If I put a green filter on, much less in the sky. Let's take that off, and you see that's actually brightened that sky from where we had it. We do not want that. And put a blue filter on, well, that's a blue sky, blue filter, it's going to brighten it up. I'm going back to the red. Now, that's no good for us, but look at what we've got here. This is the hue. Now, if I just hover on that, you see what that's doing is changing the colour of the filter. And I can sweep through that. Now, I know from what I've done previously, and you see we're coming into green now, and then as we go to blues, we get back to that really bright, but we're only halfway around the colour wheel. Let's go a little bit more, because I happen to know that if I get up to this magenta here, not too red, but in this magenta area, you can see how that's just fine-tuning that. That looks great. Now let's just, you see, so that's just pulled that through that a little bit further, just making these clouds pop that bit more. I might just wind that back very slightly to there. Let's try that. Yeah, and those clouds are really popping out there. Now you notice there's some artifacting down here. I don't quite know what's going on there. Silver Efex just seems to do that for some reason. You see it in the presets as well. It doesn't show up in the final image, so I tend not to worry too much about it. And the final thing I'm going to do before we leave here, I'm just going to pull this strength slider down. Maybe I'm not. No, we'll leave it roughly where it was. But that's another kind of tool to use, and those two together. Okay, so you might choose a red filter with a low strength, and that just gives you the depth of the hue in the filter. Okay, right. So I think we've done in there. Remember, we're just concentrating on the sky. I don't care what's happening anywhere else. So I click OK, and that's going to bring that adjustment back into Photoshop as a separate layer right here. It will take a moment or two, so let's we'll just try and be a little patient. We'll let it do its job, and then we're going to apply quite a nice little technique for this. And the order of things from here really matters. So what we're going to do next, this is the final stage, but what we're going to do next is load up one of our selections so that we get to just apply that to the sky. And I'll explain, as we're doing that, I'll explain why the order matters. So it's just going to take a little moment to get this done. It says saving image there. It's not really saving an image anywhere, so don't think your image is saved just because it says that. I don't quite know what it's doing that it calls saving, but it's not writing it to a disk anywhere. Maybe it's just saving it into Photoshop. Who knows? Programmers, eh? Okay, there's our image. It does take a few minutes. I hope that's not that wasn't too boring. I might do a bit of fancy editing in something or other. Okay, now we want that to remember to apply only to here, and I do see some artifacting down here, but we'll deal with that later. We want that to apply just in this area here, so we're going to need a mask. So let's put a layer mask on. Then we're going to apply one of our selections, and we want it to just apply to the sky. So I'm going to load selection. I'm going to load sky, but I'm going to invert this so that the selection applies to everything but the sky. And the reason that I've done that is because I want to apply. I want to just gradually come across this transition here. I don't want a harshness about it. Now, if I'd done this the other way around, right, if I'd loaded my selection first and then put on a layer mask, the selection would immediately apply to the layer mask, and it would snap the foreground colour in to the selection and the background colour into the deselection. And then we would not be able to do the next step. And the next step is to apply a gradient. Now, the reason we couldn't then do the next step if we'd done this the other way around is that applying a gradient overwrites the mask. So let me show you all of that. Let me get rid of this, and we'll just delete that. Let me get rid of that selection, and let's put the selection on first. Load selection, sky, invert. Okay. Now, if I put a mask on, bingo, there it is. And it's also the wrong way around, but I should be able to do. I've got the mask selected here, right? You see the little outline tells us we're on the mask, so if I command I, just inverts that mask, and frankly that looks truly horrible. Okay, and so what we're going to do is we're going to feather across this boundary here using the gradient mask. But if I do that now, let's have a look at that. I'm just going to hold shift down to, right, now it's done that, but let's look at the mask. Now all I've got is a gradient on the mask, and that's not what I want. I want my selection on the mask. And the problem is that let me get out of this. If I go back one and then look at this again, there's my mask. Now the problem is that applying the gradient on top of this replaces that selection. So if you apply another selection over the top of one, the old selection is replaced, and that's not what we want. Okay, so having got that out of the way, let's go back to here. We'll just delete all of that, because what I want to do is put the layer mask on first, then load the selection, and it's going to be sky invert, and you'll see why in a moment. Okay, now I've got my gradient tool selected. I'm just going to drag across this boundary. Now I might have to just undo this in a moment, because I might have remembered the order slightly wrong, and I haven't. There we go. So I've dragged across that boundary. Now let's have a look, and you see what I've done, because I'm going from foreground to background with in this direction, that forces this to be white, this to be black, and a gradient transition across here. Let's have a look at that, and there's our mask. Perfect. Okay, now I am just going to go back to here. I'm going to hit Command Z, and I am just going to constrain that again. I'm going to draw that not quite so far. And of course my problem now is that I've got a selection, so I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to just redo all of that. Just take me a moment. Let's delete that. Let's deselect, and now what I want to do is reselect. Now apply my layer mask. Let's get rid of that. Did that the wrong way around. I hate it when this happens. Okay, layer mask first. Select, reselect. Okay, now I'm just going to draw this gradient quite a bit less than I did, so that I get a narrower band across there. So let's constrain that. Let's just draw that gently there, and I feel a little better about that. So let's go look at our mask, and oh yes, there it is. Now that's perfect. Okay, so that's kind of step one. So let's get rid of that. Now you see that we've got quite harsh boundaries still, right? But those are going to disappear as we further make these conversions. Okay, so what I'm going to do next, I think, is I'm going to go and do these mountains in here. So let's have Control click here, and then I think you do Shift Alt Command E. And okay, so what I did just there, Shift Alt Command E, so select both layers, and that gives me a stamp. It takes those two layers and puts them together into this layer here. And I can call this layer. Let's do that. Double click on that. Let's call that sky. So the sky has been converted here. Okay. Now with this layer active, I can go back to filter. I can go back to Nick Collection, Silver Efex Pro2. It's going to load the image in again. And I'm just going to continue the video through whilst we do those mountains. Then I will pause the video. I'll do the rest of the conversion up to as far as we're going, and then I'll come back and show you the final image for this stage, and that's only this stage. We're then going to do some other things with it later on. Okay, so we'll just give this a chance to get into Silver Efex. There it is. Okay, so we're back into neutral now. Remember, I'm just doing these central mountains here, and what I want for in here, first off, I want a good separation between those scalloped sculpted mountains in the back there against these mid-range mountains in the front. Okay, so I'm going to just focus on in here, and what I'm going to do, because that's all bright and white and lots of snow, I'm just going to boost the brightness there very slightly, not kind of too much, maybe a bit more than 2%. I'm going to bring the highlights there up somewhat. Keep my eye on those. I'm going to bring the midtones down, and I'm going to bring the shadows down, but not too much. I do not want this stuff going to black in here. That might be a bit awful there. Let's just try. Yes, let's try a bit more of that. There we go. Okay, so that's looking quite good, but we'll just bring those midtones down a little more. Okay, not too much. Okay, and then we're going to boost the contrast. And remember, I'm just looking in here. I'm going to amplify the whites. I'm going to amplify the blacks a little, and then just see what this contrast is doing. Okay, now that's not too bad, but I'm a bit concerned about this area in here, so I'm just going to bring those shadows up somewhat. I'm feeling a bit better about that. Let's bring those up a little more. Okay, and I'm just going to pull the highlights back a little. Okay, pull these whites back a little. There we go. Boost the contrast some. Right, and then the structure. I'm going to go up a little on the structure, I think. Okay, I'm going to push the highlights. I'm going to push the midtones. And I'm going to push the fine structure. Okay, and I'm going to definitely protect the shadows by quite a lot. Okay, so let's just take that on and off and see what that looks like. So there it was before, there it is now. Okay, so that's looking a little brighter, it's looking a little contrastier. So that's looking quite nice, I think. And then we'll go and do our little filters trick. Let's see what comes of that. And we'll just run this through the colours, just focusing on those mountains behind. And there's not much happening there. Oh, a little bit of something there. Okay, so it gets very bright in there. Let's just see. Tricky. I think it's going to be hereabouts actually. I just might bring that strength up, and that feels much better. So just keep your eye on these central mountains in the back here, okay, as we turn off and on. Now that looks way better, don't you think? Kind of liking that. Okay, good. So I'm going to take that back in here. So what I want to do now is, what was the order? Is layer mask first. Then we're going to load a selection. Load selection, and it's going to be mountains. I do believe that's. And I'm going to invert that again, and there it is. So everything's selected except those mountains. Now here's the little fancy bit. I'm going to apply the gradient tool again, but this time, instead of, let me turn my zoom on, instead of the linear gradient tool, we're going to use this thing here. Now this is called the reflected gradient. And you apply your gradient in one direction, from the center of that selection down, say, and it'll apply that also in reverse. Okay, so which is kind of what we want. All right, so let me turn that off. Let's go here. I'm going to hold the shift key, and I'm going to do it upwards, I think. And I might want to undo this in a moment. Let's just see how that works. And that doesn't seem to have done what I expected it to do. Let's just have a look at that. It's done it in that direction, but it hasn't. Oh, I see. I got something wrong there. I pointed to the reflected, but I didn't actually select it. Oh, sometimes, eh? There are so many little things that can go wrong. Right, so I want to deselect this because we need the layer mask on first. Then we're going to go to select and reselect. There we go. And then we're going to select the reflected gradient tool. Now I'm going to come back in here, and I'm going to constrain that to vertical. Let's see how that looks. Bingo. Bingo, how lovely is that? Right, let's check out the gradient, and you can see that we've got a nice gradient in here. It's only just getting in here, okay, but I feel okay with that, particularly as I look at the image, okay, and I do want this to sort of stay. All right, so we've got a nice blend across here. And we still haven't done these clouds yet. So let me deselect that, okay, and you can start to see now how this is going to go. Remember, we haven't done anything with these clouds yet. Still got these two areas to go here. Okay, so I'm going to just pause things there for a while. I'm going to go and redo do these other three areas, then come back to you. Hi, Dave Smith. So we're back here at the end of our second installment of black and white conversion. I've done all the various layers, and I just want to point up one or two things that we see now. So if we go back to, in fact, let me do that. Let me go back to our layers panel, and I'm just going to isolate the original. And you'll remember that if you've seen the first part of this, when we analysed this image, there were various things we wanted to do. In particular, we wanted the sky to go very dark at the top and fade to a light grey. We wanted to pick out all these wispy clouds here. We wanted to enhance the drama in these clouds galloping across the mountain. We wanted to create separation, tonal separation between these three sets of mountains through here from bottom left through to the sculpted mountains. And I wanted to enhance the contrast in these sculpted mountains. These are very central to this image in more ways than just being central. So let's go back to our finished article. Now this is not a finished image. This is just the 5 stages of conversion that we spoke about. But there's still more to do to this image, and that's for the next part. But you can see from this we've achieved our aims. I think we've got a very dark sky at the top without it going pure black. We've got a nice gradation. We've picked out these white clouds very nicely. I really like how the drama of these clouds has really enhanced. Just show you that again. So check out those clouds now in the colour version and see how they've picked out just beautifully here. I think we've got a great tonal separation through these hills. I like how the structure and contrast of this middle range of hills has worked out, and I really like these sculpted hills. So all in all, I'm pretty pleased with that image. It looks good. And should be pretty good when it's finished. I've done a little bit of cleaning. We did get some artifacting down this right hand side here, but all in all that's pretty good so far. So far what we've got is the use of selections, hard masks and gradient masks to blend 5 different black and white conversions from Efex, and you can see all of those in this layers panel here. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to select all of these. Then I'm going to go to this flyout menu here, and I'm going to make a new group from layers, and I'm going to call this initial conversion, and it's just taken all of those, put them into a group, and they're all in there. Okay, and there's our original colour, there's our image so far. We're going to leave it right there for now. Why not come back for part 3, where I go through the image one more time and just fine-tune all of those 5 areas, and then there'll be a last part where we apply some finishing touches to the image as a whole. But I'm pretty pleased with that conversion so far. So thanks very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been worth the time, and perhaps I'll see you in part 3. That's bye for now.